If you're like me and you're starting to get to the end of your quote practice, you have a lot of questions because right now there are so many different options as dentists or dental specialists that we could do to retire, whether we want to sell our practice outright, whether we want to get a DSO to come in, buy us out. I get a lot of these questions from a lot of my coaching clients in my group. So I wanted to invite somebody that I've heard many good things about who've helped a lot of my coaching clients transition out of their practice. That's Mr. Thad Miller. Thad, thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. I really appreciate it, Jeff.
Uh,
I'm looking forward to it.
So Thad's company, and we'll be talking about it quite a bit, is do you want to look it up now as we're talking DDSmatch? But I have a friend of mine, Dr. Steve Rasmussen, that I had done some coaching with years ago. And he actually told me about the fantastic process that this group did to help him exit his practice. Dr. Steve introduced me to Thad, and I wanted to talk to him about, the different things because we all have questions. We spend our entire lives, our practices are like our babies, and we spend our whole entire lives feeding this baby and, doing all this stuff and caring for it. And if you're like me and other people, we don't want to just sell it to anybody or have somebody take it over because, we have, my employees, some of them have been with me from day one. And not only is it for me, it's for them too, because I want to transition to make sure that they're taken care of whoever takes over the practice. And I think a lot of the dentists, feel like that too. So why don't you just tell the people a little bit about yourself and maybe how you got into the position that you're in now?
Absolutely. Well, I've been in the dental industry for 28 years now. Time flies. But I started with Patterson. So I was a territory person for just about a year and a half. Then I was a general manager for 10 years. And so I saw, the challenges when it came to transitioning a dental practice. And, I'd get calls as the general manager like, hey, Thad, it's been great working with your team and I just need to close my account. I'm like, close your account? What do you mean? And they're like, well, I'm retired. I'm like, okay, well, did somebody buy it? Did you bring an associate or did you find somebody? No, I'm just closing my doors. And I just couldn't believe that. And I the analogy is like, it's different than, if you were owned a boat, like say you're a sailor or you buy a boat and you like to sail, when you're done with sailing, you don't just unhook it from the dock and just let it float into the ocean or anything. You sell the boat, right? I mean, you find a buyer for the boat. But I think for years, there really wasn't a great solution for that. And it was done in a really closed box type situation. And, there were brokers that were representing both sides of the transaction. And they kind of said, okay, you can look at these practices if you go through these certain things. And what we did is we opened up the box a bit. I created a website called DDSmatch.com where young dentists can post who they are looking for opportunities, not unlike if they were looking to buy a car or looking to find a mate or something like that. I mean, that's what, the younger generation does now, looking for, that's the first place everybody goes. So this was an opportunity for them to say, hey, I'm a young dentist and, in Baton Rouge, and I'm interested in Louisiana. I'm interested in Indianapolis. I'm interested in San Diego. And that mechanism helps connect with my team all across the country of their interest to potentially connect them to practices that we list. And like Dr. Rasmussen, I mean, we found his buyer in Illinois, a state over, and she wasn't happy where she was, and she'd never been to Crawfordsville. And, through the process of working with Dr. Rasmussen, the seller, we got everything ready and we were able to work with him on the sale of his practice and then also a lease of his current building that he still owns, and he leases to the doctor that purchased his practice. And I actually connected her to a realtor in town that sold her a house. So, that's really, we have to be comprehensive in this because these are big life decisions. Like you said, if it's a baby, you go a lot to, it goes through a lot to start that life, and then it grows. And our analogy is usually like an airplane, the hardest parts are taking off and landing if you're a pilot, but there's turbulence along the way as you're flying the plane, but we're there to help with a smooth landing. at the end of the process.
So a few questions come to mind. Number one is maybe what stage in the practice should you just sort of be? I know, like if you want to retire next year, like in 6 months, that may not be enough time to get things
Yeah,
ready. So maybe how long? Let's say somebody wants to retire when they're 60.
yeah.
When should they starting to think about just things in general?
I think 5 years is a
5 years.
good number.
Okay.
Yeah, and right now there's a lot of different options. It's a great time to be a dentist for multiple reasons. Um, there's a lot of options. I have dentists who are transitioning their practices in their 40s and doing something different in dentistry.
Hmm.
I have dentists who are in their 70s that are transitioning. It's all across the board. There are always opportunities in dentistry. If it's working working as a professor at a school, or being an employee, or working in a clinic, or whatever it may be, in addition to owning your own practice, or working for a group, or working for a DSO. So I think the bottom line is just starting that conversation 5 years in advance of what you want to do. And we've got a couple different processes. We've got our trusted transition process, which is for dentists who are 6 months to a year and a half away from really transacting. And then we've got what's called a practice optimizer experience. And that's more of a comprehensive, like, let's get the ducks in a row for a future transition. And that includes a lot of the different people that we work with. If it's an investment planner, to make sure that there's enough money to retire. There's insurance concerns, so we can help them kind of right size their dental insurance. Some legal matters to make sure everything's in place for a transaction. And that's the practice optimizer experience. So we've got a couple different scenarios. It's never too late to have a conversation, and all of our conversations are confidential and they're free, to get started, just to talk about what we can do to help.
So besides whoever's going to be selling the practice, besides talking to like a broker or a DSO or something like that, who are some of the other people, professionals that maybe we could, and you kind of mentioned a little bit about legal and taxes, some people that can also, we could also sort of put together as our trusted advisors to kind of look at the transition along the way. What advice would you give there?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that a most critical connection would be an attorney with some dental experience. And the way we work in dentistry, a DDSmatch, our professionals have have these advisors in our area that we work with. We stay in our lane. We don't do any legal work. We don't do any tax work. We're just there to find opportunities and to work them through the process to make sure it's a smooth closing. And it's all dependent on what the seller wants to do. I mean, again, you don't have to have the path, the finish figured out when you start on the path. It's really more, we're best trained to ask a lot of questions to understand what our clients want in the end. And there's a lot of things that goes into that, and there's a lot of questions that we ask. And I think I'd start with a DDSmatch professional, or a broker that's trusted in your market, to kind of figure out what it looks like. But they can connect you to good people, like an attorney, that can make sure that in a worst case scenario, the dentist gets hit by a bus, what happens to the practice?
Yeah.
Can we transact quickly, because that value drops by the day? And I've been in too many situations where the spouse of the dentist couldn't even sell the practice because things weren't in place. So it just went to zero. And that's usually a significant part of their wealth.
Speaking of things in place, and let's say the person's 4 to 5 years out from retiring or selling their practice, what are some things that they can be doing in the practice to I guess increase the value as much as possible before they transition out? You have any recommendations there?
Yeah, no, I think the most important thing is make sure that the revenue stays stable. I mean, ideally it's growing, right?
Hmm.
But there are clinicians who are like, I just don't want to work that much harder. I'm in good shape. I want to take care of my clients. I want to take care of my patients. I don't want to add another hygiene day, or I don't want to do triple hygiene anymore, anything like that. But if they can keep it stable, that would be the most important thing. And I think I think it's important to really look at the practice through the eyes of a buyer, and it's not easy to do. I mean, you think about, like, even in your home, you walk around and, like, man, I ought to really get that painted. That crack in the ceiling, just, it's not bugging me. It's, the ceiling's not going to fall in. And, you do that, like, you know, a month before you sell, before you list your home for sale, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of that can be done along the way that can make a difference, now, for the future. I mean, if there's a employee that is is not good for the practice, don't think about it like, well, I'll just give that problem to the next person. Do something about it. Replace that person.
It's funny you say
Um,
that because whenever I walk in our house sometimes and I'll walk in and go, gosh, it's so clean and everything's in place. We must be having some people over tonight or we're having a party. My wife won't get it all, I guess that's
right.
kind of similar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, I'm not a dentist, but I know it's a very routine, repetitive type thing. And we run into habits of only coming in the back door, go straight to your private office, and then, hit hygiene one right out of the gate.
Yeah.
But so many times, you know, I come in through the reception area, and they've got a TV on that's got a wire hanging out of the ceiling, and you know CNN's on, and they're reporting on murders and things like that. And I mean, that's the last thing that a patient needs to see before they go in
It's
for a
funny
root
you
canal.
it's funny
Yeah.
you say that. This was years ago, but there was a big denture. I'm not going to name the name. This big denture clinic that moved into town, and they were out, in an area kind of by the mall and stuff. So I went there to meet the dentist, and it was like 12:05. It was like right when lunch started. So there was only one. There was a huge waiting room. There was only one patient in the waiting room. So I wanted, I wanted to go there where they weren't busy and stuff. So I walk in this huge waiting room, and it's super loud because it's like a wood floor. There's nothing to absorb the sound. And at the and at the very back of the waiting room, this TV is just blaring. I don't know if you remember Jerry Springer show.
Oh yeah.
And these
Oh
two women are fighting and cussing and beeping out. I'm like, holy cow, this is crazy.
yeah.
But I remember when I started my practice, I really wanted to focus on customer service. So this was 15, almost 20 years ago. I was always focused on like Ritz Carlton, Four Seasons, Disney, that sort of thing, like you're talking about. So anytime you walk into these places, you're looking around and it's just spotless. And I'll always make it a point, like you said, to at least once a week come through my office. Like today I don't see patients today on Fridays. Come through my office, through the waiting room, look around, sit down, kind of, and 99.9% of the people don't do that.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'm really glad the person that kind of trained me back then did that, because I've caught stuff so many times, like a dead, insect in the corner, or spider webs, or like you said, this needs painting or whatever. So just the little things matter. I mean, like, how many times have you gone into a nice restaurant and then you go in the bathroom and it looks like a third world country? And it's like,
Right.
if the
Yeah.
bathroom looks like this, can you imagine what the kitchen looks like?
Right, and they're actually it's actually a healthcare environment,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I think things like that. Yeah, I mean, like the clutter, and again, it's not like you're selling it immediately, but that makes an impact on keeping patients.
hmm
You don't need to focus on new patients if you're keeping your patients, right? I mean, you're going to have people that move, right? There's going to be people that leave the practice for various reasons. But if you're keeping everybody there, there's less of a need to worry about doing promotions to bring new patients in. And if you're taking good care of your patients, they're going to tell friends like them to keep coming back. So again, that your main question was, what's the most important thing? Keep your revenue stable, because if it's a depreciating asset, even if you have a buyer that's interested, that's really excited about it, their biggest question is like, okay, why is this going down?
yeah.
What are you doing? And when a dentist says, well, I'm just slowing down, well, they think, well, are you really slowing down, or are people leaving for other reasons that you're
hmm
not telling me?
Is there any difference
So
between somebody selling a general dentistry practice or a specialist practice?
Not really. I mean, there's obviously components to each of them, referral base, and if you're a specialist and you're selling, I mean, and you're 5 years out, don't forget to go visit with that new general dentist that just set up in town. I mean, don't just stick with you know, the people you play golf with,
Yeah,
as your referral partners. You got to really nurture that. I always tell people there's no cruise control in dentistry. You can't just hit the button and go on cruise. I mean, it's something that requires energy at all times to keep it moving. And that's hard because, you do it for a long time, you kind of get tired of it and burn out. And that's, when you need to be thinking about it. But I always like to have my clients finish on top and finish. Again, they don't have to be, growing 20% a year. Just staying stable is really the critical piece. And that helps in evaluation process. With our company, we do third party business valuation. So I don't price the practices we represent. We have a CPA firm that we are engaged with that does about 500 valuations a year just for us. And they're the ones that value the business. And that helps a lot because it's third party. So a buyer is going to trust that, I'm not just doing it based on what it looks like for me or for the dentist. It's third party and a stable revenue base and a stable expense. I mean, you can't just hand out 10% raises every year because your staff has, been there a long time. You got to stay, steady. And I know right now, with the hygienist shortage, I've got a lot of clients that are short of hygienists. They're like, well, we'll just get by with one hygienist. Well, no, you just might need to hire, a hygienist and pay him more than you're used to because you got to keep that revenue. You got to keep that revenue going because if you're trying to sell the practice and you're short a hygienist, it's going to be even harder for the buyer to find a hygienist because they're brand new. They don't know what they're doing, a lot of times. So, you got to look at it through the buyer's eyes. I think that would summarize what I would say.
are there any? And I hear this from my accountant, who I'm as you probably, yeah, I think you already know, I'm real estate heavy, real estate investing.
Mm-hmm.
So he
Mm-hmm.
does my dental practice, plus he does a lot of my real estate, or all of my real estate. And he was always saying one of the biggest mistakes he sees physicians and dentists make is they sell their practice and then they come to him and go, "Hey, I've got this huge tax bill now because I just sold my practice. Is there something that you can do?" And he's like, "I'm sorry, but after the fact, I can't." So do you have like any recommend? I know you're not an accountant or an attorney, but from your experience and from all the different transactions that you've seen, are there anything that maybe we could be thinking about to help mitigate our tax expense before we sell?
I mean, I leave that to the specialists. I leave that to the accountants, and I'd say the biggest thing would be to have that conversation early. Just like you said. Let's talk about it. One of the thing that's unique about feel like we're fairly unique about, like I said, is with DDS Match with the professionals. We've got people in our market that have done a number of transactions, and
Hmm.
attorneys that have done a number of transactions, accountants have done a number of transactions. You might work with your accountant because he's somebody you went to high school with, but if they haven't done a dental transaction, they don't know what they're doing. I mean, they know taxes, but this is different. So I would encourage any dentist to work with professionals who have that niche, or at least work with a good majority of those of dentists, just so they know how it is, because selling a dental practice is different than selling a hotel. It's
Right.
just different.
All right. So now let's get to what we've all been waiting for, and that's the DSO question.
Sure.
Because we have, I've had probably an email every week, private equity reaching out to me about buying my practice. And anytime you go to meetings now, it's just a ton of private equity. So tell us a little bit about what the difference between would be. Let's just start off there. If somebody wanted to sell their practice with you guys, that's pretty straightforward. But what's the difference between selling straight out and then maybe the private equity, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, and we represent clients with whatever they want to do. I mean, we're here to deliver on what we uncover is best for them. And maybe it's a DSO, maybe it's a group, maybe it's an individual, but we've done all of that, and we do it all the time. I think the biggest difference between the two, I kind of turn it back on the client as like, what commitment do they want to have post closing? So, most of our clients have worked for themselves their whole life. And the last time they worked for someone, maybe they had a paper route, or maybe they worked in a restaurant or something while they were in dental school, or, they waited tables or something like that.
Hmm.
So it's been a long time since they worked for someone. And it's been a long time, especially if they're working for someone in something that they built, you know? So I think that's the important thing. When you sell to a DSO or possibly a group, there's going to be a post transaction commitment. You're going to have to work there for 3 to 5 years, because obviously the people that are buying the practice in most situations, they're not dentists. They're not going to come in there and take over the clinical responsibilities. So things are going to change, and that's okay. Maybe they need to change. But the biggest thing that they need to know, if they're considering that, is there's going to be a commitment afterwards. There's a lot of promises when it comes to, you can get X times EBITDA or whatever it may be. And that's a word that's come up a lot. But a lot of that you've got to earn, and you got to continue to stay there and earn. And if that's not something you want to do, you don't have to do it. I mean, there are still plenty of practices being bought by individuals across the country. It's not one or the other. It is, you have options. And I want to make that really clear, that there are options for dentists, because it's a great profession. And the reason I say it's great is because, you've got some control over this. The sellers still have the upper hand in this process, because it's a good business to be in. I mean, why would private equity, who could invest in anything, want to invest in dentistry? Because it's a good business, right?
Yeah.
They if they felt like, hotels were a good business, they would invest in that. But right now, there's a number of them that feel like dentistry is a good business, because it is. Now, it's not easy, at all. There's a lot that goes into it, but that's the reason they're investing in it, because it's a good business. And that's a good business for an individual. It's a good business for a group. It's a good business for a DSO. So, I think the most important thing is, the saying, know your worth as a seller, and make sure you work with professionals to guide you through that. Because it's real easy to just, work with someone who can pick up the phone and call the person who's going to give them a number and say, hey,
Hmm.
this is a great deal. That's not being an advisor. That's just picking up the phone. But really getting to the core of what you want with your life's work and how you want it to transition. That's the most important thing for us.
So if somebody is thinking about, maybe they're talking to a couple of DSO groups about selling their
Mhm.
practice, what you're saying is your group could help with that transition if they choose to. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's
Okay.
actually even more critical that you have representation on a DSO sale,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of strings that are attached to a DSO sale. And that's just part of it. I mean, that, like I said, they're most of the time, they're not the dentist that's going to be doing the work. If you sell to a private buyer, a young dentist, they're going to take over relatively soon after the transaction, and it's all on them. And you get the investment, you get the money right away. You get it all at
Hmm.
closing. When it comes to a DSO, there's so many different structure components to it. If it's an earnout, if it's a, if it's a revenue component of the future business that they're going to hold on to, that you can have a shares in this new company that you're selling into. You got to really, structure on those deals is so critical, because they can give you a huge number and you're like, wow, that's great, I got this, but you don't really get it all right away. You got to earn it, and the whole group has to do well to get it all too. So structure is so critical in a DSO deal, and just taking what they first give you is a terrible idea, because this is what they do all the time. They
Hmm.
they they want to buy low and sell high. You need representation, and it makes a huge difference on what that looks like, because, like I said, it's a commitment, and you're working for someone. And most of the dentists I work with haven't worked for somebody in 20 or 30 years.
Yeah. So your company, if somebody's interested in maybe just thinking about the process of, hey, I know I want to, I know I want to sell in, 3 years or 5 years or 7 years or whatever. What would, like, if they wanted to maybe get you guys involved, what would the steps look like? How do they get in touch with you, or what they need
Just
to do?
yeah, just give us a call. I mean, our phone number is on the website, and there's an 800 number on there, and or you can just simply, they can email me. It's just tmiller@ddsmatch.com. I can get them connected to our representatives. We're in 47 states. I've got over 50 DDS match professionals that work individually with dentists. We all use the same process. We use the same website. We use the same valuation process. And our goal is a you know is a transition, not a transaction. We talk about that all the time. We want it to be. This isn't just selling a car. I mean, this is a big deal, and
Yeah,
we take it very, very personal on how we do this.
absolutely. So again, the website is DDSmatch.com. Mr.
Correct.
Thad is your go-to resource with that. And I'm really glad we had this conversation, because I was only thinking that you guys were like a brokerage to where you just sell practices. But I'm really glad to hear that you actually represent, if somebody wanted to not only sell their practice with you guys, but if they had DSO involved, that you could help with that too, because it's so important. People just want to rush into these things, and to, surround yourself, like it says in the Bible, surround yourself with advisors and counselors. That's the wise thing to do. And I think the more eyeballs to look at this, the better.
Yeah, again, it's a like you said, you referenced it earlier, it's your baby. It's
Mhm.
something that you've nurtured. And going back to what I talked about when I got that call from the dentist and like, yeah, I'm just closing my doors. I'm thinking, what about all those patients? What about those staff that are there? What about all those records? I mean, what happens to all that? It doesn't just vanish into ether. I mean, let's find somebody that's a good fit that you're proud of. And when you write that letter, to which is not easy for my clients to write that letter to say, it's time for me to retire. I've been looking forward to this. I've been working on this, and I'm really proud of who is taking over your care. And that's a big deal, and we want to make sure that they feel really good about writing that letter.
Yeah.
And it's all about how we do it through our process.
Well, Mr. Thad, thanks again. Reach out to him if you guys have any questions. DDSmatch.com. I appreciate your time today.
Absolutely, thanks. I really appreciate you reaching out.